got asked to do this talk, one of my few claims to fame as a leader is that I hitchhiked across the country from North Carolina to California in 1974 to get to Convergence. The only Convergence I've ever gone to. So, amazing. So Darcy heard that story one time, and she said to me, I think you could just, do a talk about, weaving journeys. And I thought, oh, yeah, but, I'm only 50-something. I still have a long way to go, I hope. But anyway, I have to say, driving over here today, I kept thinking, I'm so glad I am not 50. It's pretty hard to get a ride when it's just that, even though you think it's a pleasure to see it. So let me talk about the hitchhiking. Now, let me see if you do this. I have never done this kind of talk before. I've done a little teaching, Daiwa style, in a couple meetings here. But I've never done this kind of talk before. And I want your help, please. If I'm talking too fast, if I can't understand, if I'm, confused, whatever. Stand up, wave your hand, sing out, give me a slow down sign, can't hear sign, whatever. And we'll try to make it as good as we can for all of us. I gave out these handouts, and we'll talk about them in a little while. You're not going to be the first one. After Darcy asked me to do this, I went to news last summer, and I noticed how easy it was, usually, for leaders to find something to talk about when they had 2 minutes to talk, walking between things, or if they were there working late at night. I've noticed this before, by the way, also. But I thought, if I just tell my story, I'm always interested to hear how you learn to weave, or what you like to weave, or do you sell your weaving, or what kind of loom you have, all the different questions that come up when you have kids riding a car together on a loom or whatever. So that's what I'm trying to do. I came up with this list of questions that the handouts that I already put around, and I'm going to work on trying to answer some of them, at least somewhat. And I also put them out in a handout because my hope is that it could be that everyone would spend at least a little time, if they feel like it, thinking about her or his own journey as a leader. And what you've done, what you want to do, where you are, that kind of thing. Pretty awesome. Not to set unreachable goals, but just kind of keep in touch with your dreams. One of the things that always gets talked about in those little getting to know each other kind of conversations is what's the rest of your life like. So I'll do that first. First, I'd like to see what my son's questions today. Andrew is sitting to see, waving at me. Emmett is wearing a red and white striped shirt. Brandon has his colored sleeves on. And Jason's the cameraman right this minute. And my twin sister Jane is here too, who does some weaving for me. And my sister-in-law Joan is here. And it's possible, because they always run late, one of my other sisters is on late. Oh, we won't tell her, I said it. But it's not good. Yeah, I have 6 sons. 2 of them are not here, of course. One's working at the barn right now, and the other one's up at Brandeis getting ready to graduate next week. My husband builds winter chairs, and we're working this morning. He also said, why would you? And I said, I would want you there. I would think you would want me there. Anyway, so we're going to make But he decided not to. And we live in a big old house in northeast Connecticut. We lived in eastern Connecticut all of our lives. We bought this big old house. It's on my timeline up here. That we finally bought a house here 7 or 8 years ago. We've been renting and working as a caretaker and living in Coventry for 16 and a half years during this time, all the back of the war. And before that, I lived in other parts of the country. I told her I was taking a bus or whatever. I was such a liar. I took off. I think I allowed about a week to get to North Carolina. And I know that the first night I got to Elkhart, Indiana. And the way I got to Elkhart was the first truck driver who saw me stopped his car and struck, a semi, a 18-wheeler, on the freeway and backed up to pick me up. And he was a wonderful man. He was fine. And then, actually, the truck drivers were superb rides. They would drive through the night. They wanted company. They were wonderful, working class, down-to-earth people. I never had any trouble with any truck drivers. And they would, take me out for breakfast at the truck stop. If they were heading south and I was still going west, they'd buy me breakfast, or I'd buy my own. It doesn't matter. And they'd say, okay, Jim or Sal or whoever, are any of you guys going west? And they sort of pass me on to the next time. So I made it across the country in record time. It really didn't do much like getting off the highway, but I did in Illinois and Madison, Wisconsin. I have a few friends to look up, and in Wyoming I stopped because the son of another good leaving friend from North Carolina was living in, I can't remember, Jackson, I think, Wyoming. I couldn't see him, so that's why I can't remember. I got to the city, and the person I was hoping to look up wasn't there. So I thought, well, I'm in Wyoming, and I don't have to be at Convergence until, say, next Thursday, and this was say, Friday. But I didn't look. I read it in my journal lately, but I don't have the days in my mind. I was keeping a journal at the time. I've kept a journal for 35 years. Anyway, I thought, well, I've got this friend in Seattle. Maybe I'll go there first, kind of on my way to California. So I hitchhiked further west and then south, and I did get to Convergence on time. And I walked in Convergence with my backpack because that's what I had. And I also did not have a place to stay, which was, I kind of sort of had a brother of a friend who maybe would be able to put me up, but I never met him, and he didn't know about it. Yeah, it was 1970, exactly. And he made it pretty clear, pretty quickly, that he would, they didn't mind me crashing there one night on the floor, but he didn't want his brother Casey sent to people across the country expecting to stay with him. He was fine. He was fine. So, meanwhile, I'm back at Convergence the second day with my backpack on my back, and some wonderful lady at whose name I forget, but it's in my journal, probably her first name only, said, where are you staying? And I said, I have no idea. She hooked me up with Helen Woods Pope, who's a wonderful California neighbor, dead now. Lived in a gorgeous Victoria, very close to the downtown site of the Convergence. And I crashed at Helen Pope's house, which was the same place where Peter Collingwood was staying. He had an apartment downstairs, but several of us were crashing before. And she was just a wonderful person. And I never wove the sprang for her that I volunteered. And she's dead now. So I'll live with that. So I put up this timeline. My sister suggested, I think it's a great idea. This is where I was born. And at every 10-year mark, I don't expect you to be able to read it, but I'm just, kind of saying this will help me stay on track. The extreme top line are sort of major life events, like leaving for college and going to Cuba and my son's being born, buying a house, and getting married. And down at the bottom, in blue, again, I don't expect you to read it, are things that happened in my legal life. So that's why that's up there. Before I went to North Carolina, I just went down there to visit someone, and then I ended up staying. A lot of this is in my article, which is the other handout that you can have at the end if you want to take with you and read. Before I went there, I went to Clark. I left college. I left high school, left home, and went to Clark, and Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. And there was a little, because it was 1969, 1970, there was a little push there to get going on crafts. There were a couple people who wanted pottery. I mean, you know the routine. One young woman who lived in the same dorm I did, but I didn't really know her that well. One time she'd come bought 5 yards of satin, and she was going to make herself a dress, and she cut this dress. Like, she just made the sleeves like tubes. Anyway, she had obviously had not done any sewing, had no idea. She apparently had taken a little weaving class or something. All I remember from that little bit of craft workshop thing was one evening when there were maybe 10 of us and one warping board and one cone of cotton, which is in this was weaving, and we all wound the warp together. Like each person got to weave like you got to wind like 20 ends or something like that, so we could know what it was like to wind the warp. And then somehow the warp must have gotten on, but I don't really remember being part of that. I might have observed it, but I don't remember. But in July of 1971, I was able to borrow, there really wasn't a craft room, it was sort of this little corner of the basement next to the boiler room. I was able to borrow that little table room and take it home, and it had this warp on it, which I'll pass around, but it's a, it's a .12. That's what it is. And I took it to this apartment that I was living in and worked on it for a while, and had the Davidson book too, by the way, Margaret Porter Davidson, and thought, okay, well, I can see what this is like. I want to do one of these other ones. So, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I kind of thought I could figure it out. And I put on, I took the warp out and re-threaded it and wove this, which my dear mother has kept and washed a number of times, and bleached even, I think. Thank goodness it's acrylic. And she lent it back to me so I could bring it to this talk. So, hi guys. You can guess who this is. This is my niece Anna and my mom. And I assume Judy drove the car. Anna, did you drive or is Judy coming in too?
Oh, I love fun.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I did that little bit of weaving and knew I wanted to do more. And before that, the only other thing that's on the timeline that's sitting over here that I noticed in the weaving was a cane chair. That was before the doll made. This chair was my dad's when he was born in 1904. Anyway, he was born in 1904, so this is an old chair. And it hadn't had a seat on it for a long time. And when we were in 4-H, somebody offered to teach chair painting when I was about 12 or so. That's why I remember it. And I've been caning chairs ever since. And wherever I lived, if I needed to make a little extra money, caning chairs did come in handy many times. So accent on little money, by the way. You can't make much money caning chairs. Although it's expensive to have it done, I mean, but in terms of time, it's not easy to the chair caning and visiting Sturbridge Village and seeing demonstrators weaving. And I just thought, I want to do this. But I didn't really have any concept of how I would maybe get around to doing it. Hi, Judy, welcome. You want to sit in the family corner? They're waving you over to the family corner.
Hi, Judy.
So I went to North Carolina. I worked a couple of factory jobs and a waitress and a lot of different things. Quit college, gone to Cuba. And I went to North Carolina and I asked everyone I met, there was and is a strong and vibrant crafts community in North Carolina. I say is, I haven't been there lately, but I believe there is.
It's still strong.
And although Gemma, who moved there, hasn't found as good a week, she's told us that several times. They retired there a while ago. And we miss Gemma. Oh, thanks, Mary Alice. Sorry about that. Anyway, I did find someone who was willing to take me on as an apprentice because she needed a mother's help. She had another apprentice coming. Anyway, and she didn't sell a lot of weaving. She was executive director for this small crafts guild that was a multi-craft guild that had a huge sale once a year, the first weekend in November. And some of those, particularly potters and glass blowers and furniture makers, not so much the weavers, but particularly certain people who had following and had wonderful work, would make their whole lives, their whole year's income at that one sale. It was a big guild, a big selling guild, which I joined eventually. So I stayed with her for a year as an apprentice. joined that guild. It was a jury guild, of course, and I asked the jury to join that guild. And another neighbor in that guild needed some help getting ready for a show, so I became her partner for about a year. So I had this small phase in my life of weaving full-time, all the time. You okay? And I really thought that that was going to be my life. I was going to have a weaving career of some kind, even if it was just making lots of stoles and ponchos and shawls and pillows, which was what we made. That was how I would make a living. In fact, I found a letter I wrote to my mom, which she graciously gave back to me. I can't remember why she gave it back to me, but she did. It was delivered, and I got it back. And I wrote something about the way this partnership was going. At this point, we were deciding to break up the partnership. And I totaled out what I had made for the year. I got out $375 in cash. I got back the $200 worth of materials that I had put in. I got another $400 in cash, and then I got $1,000 worth of materials that the team had purchased. So I came up with a grand total with a couple of things of $2,275, and I wrote, "Pretty good, huh?" It looks like I really can make a living weaving. Well, that has not proven to be true for me, although it is for other people. I want to show some slides, and I think maybe this is the time to do that. So let's separate this curtain, separate the timeline. I have like 20 slides from that North Carolina thing. I don't know if this way shows you what happened with that part of it. Oh, yes. This is number one. Want to get the lights somebody? This is a piece I wove for the jury to join that craft guild. It's a black walnut branch, twig, and linen. And I can't tell you exactly how I did it. I mean, it's essentially sort of a macrame. It didn't have glue in it, so I must have made some kind of little knot that goes through. And I guess I have to do this. Yeah, you want to do that? Oh, yeah, that'd be great, because I have no idea. You had it in what I'm saying.
Oops.
This is another piece I put in the jury for that. Jason, if you could like to see okay? This was a piece of yardage. I really wish I'd made it into a blanket. Unfortunately, I made it into a coat, which I literally never wore. I don't remember wearing it once, except when I was trying it on to pin the hem. And I left it in North Carolina when I hitchhiked to California, and then when I came back just to get a few things and shove them in the back of somebody's VW later, because it turned out I wasn't going to go back and live in North Carolina. I didn't take it, I gave it away. And I am willing to bet you that no one's ever wore it. It was super heavy for North Carolina, and it was just, a pretty clunky weave for a coat. Most of us don't want to walk down the street with a weird flag. I have a little scrap of the fabric I can pass around. And it was a nice, firm quill. And I want, oh yeah, here's a little pipe. This is the way I designed this plaid. The woman I was apprenticed to had some piles of what was sort of rump woolish kind of quality wool. And she had like 12 ounces of this and 3 pounds of that and so on. And I have a hunch that I've never said out loud before, that this is how native natural dyers design their plaids. They dye what they can dye, and then they decide what they've got, and then one of the reasons they weave plaids is because they can divide it up proportionate to the amount of yarn they have. So, let's go on. This is a silk table runner, kind of lace, Bronson, I think, I'm not sure. Swedish lace, maybe, on a table that a friend of mine over with built on. This was not typical of our pillows, but I was interested in overshot. There were some wonderful weavers in the area doing overshot, and that's another little wood piece from the same woodworker. Yeah, well, I'm upset about that one. work, we made these square shawls. I've got one of them here. In fact, the natural browns, grays one I have here. I had forgotten that I gave it to one of my sisters, but she went to that. I went to that for me, as you can see. Yeah, it was 1974, so just shawl. We did lots of those. And the middle one, which is why I took the slide, that was a thick and thin yarn that did that neat thing, which I meant to have done a whole lot more since, but I was fascinated with the way it fell and created a diamond. It's just plain. This one, someone said, you should weave prayer shawls, and I would have been glad to, but no one ever tried me. It does look like Jewish prayer shawls. One. And another one. There's a shawl here that was made into a baby blanket that's kind of the same weight as those. These were neat, I thought, and we did sell some of them. They're little Rhea bags. You know how ladies' purses sometimes get so heavy? These Rhea bags were that heavy before you put it. But they were neat looking, I thought. Oh, and I got the idea of doing some, tapestry throws. And so there's a couple of them here. They were, actually, I think probably every piece of, well, not every, almost every piece of weaving I did in that partnership was basically pretty cheesy weaving. We didn't finish it very well. It was soft. You could put your fingers through it if you tried. That's fun. I wonder if that blanket held up. And there's another one. I'm really glad I found this slide. I didn't know I had it, but I have remembered how much I liked these bright colors because I was kind of scared of color at the time. I mean, I used some, and my partner loved color, but I kind of felt like, oh, I don't know. And I remember thinking well, I just tried something and it kind of worked, and it got sold the first time I showed it. So I never even had, I thought, a picture of it. So I'm really glad. Oh, this is a show. I didn't take these slides, and most of my pieces are not in them, but right about in the center of the slide is something that is sort of dramatic, black and gray and white. What it really is a white stole with long mohair Rhea knots or fringes, but some of them were not, so that it could be sort of shaped, and feathers. And it was inspired because I had worked on the play The Seagull by Chekhov when I was in college. It was inspired by that sort of seagull image. And if I had been hanging this show, I would never have hung it the way they did because, it was really better to have those fringes hanging down somehow. But anyway, that's one of my pieces. Well, there's a lot of nice stuff in this show. One other piece of mine, it's possible that those ponchos are ours, but the big black and white and gray blanket is mine. And that was just a blanket, just woven on two panels and sewed up the middle, but it does have a nice look, I think. This is just for my friend Dorothy. She's a wonderful painter. She's been a painter for years. You can't really see them very well, and I'm so glad I have this at least, because I was thinking, I don't think I have anything of her tapestries. She wove these two tapestries that are on a white panel about in the center of the slide. She had never woven anything before. She went to Penland and wove this amazing tapestry with this field and this hillside and horses dancing on the top of the hill in the moonlight and the sky and the moonlight and the clouds. And I was just like, wow, this is why I want to weave, but I didn't think I could do it. That's one. And that's just another one, but I don't know why I included it because it's the same stuff. I was thinking there was something else in there. Oh, yes. This is a wall hanging. I think I called it Source. I don't own it. I don't know where it is. It didn't sell that I know of. It's another thing that got left in North Carolina when I left. And some friends said, don't you want that? And I said, well, I can't fit it in this pink up and give it to somebody. So that's that. And this was another neat little thing we did. This was a pretty nice idea for wall hangings, I thought. Slow, of course, because you have to do a lot of needle weaving. But pretty effective. And we could have left, and we did often leave a lot of work showing. But they're little walnut bands that somebody made, old work made. So, and we can put the wall on. And we were definitely loading up, I'm sure, the loom to take, it somehow unfolded or loaded in the van somehow in the truck. And we were taking it, we did regularly take this loom to shows so that we could sit there and weave and make conversation. Anyway, so that's what I looked like at the time. And that's it for the slideshow. So let's find out what else there is to this day. Oh, this is nice. Not the cartoon. This is the first thing I wove when I went from being an apprentice with Anne to being Linda's partner. This is the first thing I wove that I can remember, and certainly the first thing that I kept by giving it to someone in the family. I wove it for my mom, who has taken beautiful care of it. It was woven, as initials somewhere, for her, MHC, by PC in 73. I would not make a throw like this. I would not put fringe on the long selvage side. I would probably maybe not even put it on. I mean, fringe doesn't feel that good when you're trying to take a nap. It kind of bothers you. But at the time, so let's today. Oh, maybe I'll pass it around. Yeah, sure. We'll pass it around. Oh, and here's the poncho that was also in here. That belongs to Kathy, who's also taken excellent care of it. And this is some hand spun, nice, you know. This is the way these things. Oh, and I put her initials on this too. That's nice. Why did I do that? I didn't even realize I had. It could be woven, you know, like boat neckish, or this way, you know. And we just wove a big square and cut it, obviously, and lined it and stuff. The two Mary Alices at the back table are collecting things, so if you end up with something in your hands and you have no idea where to go with it, send it that way. Ah, yes. Here's the scrap of this is all I have left of that coat yarn. I'm glad I saved that. This one's getting really pretty sat out. But again, so many times I gave things to people who stayed in the family or stayed close and gave them back eventually, which is really nice. When my aunt died, I got this back. One weaver I knew down in North Carolina, besides the apprentices and besides the partners, was named Gypsy Hollywood. Her picture's here in this binder. If you come up later, you'll look at the pictures. Gypsy's picture's here. I think she must have been about 80 then. And she had been weaving a long time. She was a doctor's wife, a doctor's widow. Lived in a little house with her watch geese outside, with cherry paneling walls from the trees they cut down when they built their house. This is sort of a simple little house. Her living room had a loom in it, and probably a rocking chair, but no couch. And she made her work by walking up and down her hallway, going from doorknob to doorknob. And I guess she had a couple pegs there to make her draw. But she was a wonderful weaver. She was weaving coverless, charging $60 for double bed coverless. I so wish I had bought one. But at the time, I'm sure I thought, oh, I can weave. Which I did, but it's not the same as owning one at Gypsy. Anyway, I'm glad I have pictures at least. And I'm glad I met her. And she also wove little inlaid tapestry. You can sort of see them in these mini pictures. If you had a magnifying glass, you could really see them. Inlaid tapestry, kind of just a little scene, like maybe just a little, typically a little cabin on a hill kind of thing. And one time I stopped in to see her, probably several I stopped in to see her, I don't think I was alone. And she said, look what I did with this cabin. And we looked at it and thought it was nice. And she said, who would ever build a cabin without a chimney? Anyway, so I was interested, I talked about her at that because she was weaving a lot of Lee's Surrender, which is the old-fashioned coverlet weave, and she did it very fine and perfect, and I did it in a chunky kind of wool, but that was inspiration. This is something I wove that ended up being my dad. He said, no, he died 6 years ago. But this is some of my early spinning and vegetable dyeing and stuff that I wove also in that same era. That's the same kind of warp we would put on, like the throws supply of African cotton that she bought in the marketplace. And, no, that's interesting. You know how your memory, like, it's really pretty clear in some ways, and all of a sudden you kind of come to this, like, door and you can't open it? That's what's happening right this second. I have, at home, I didn't bring that. I have something that I traded from a Peace Corps volunteer. But she was in the Philippines, because this is from the island of Mote, and it's a mulberry bark, that paper stamped wall piece, essentially. They use it for room dividers and use for skirts and stuff, I'm told. And I remember trading her a poncho, and I had it in my mind that that I got the African cotton from her too, but maybe it was like from her partner or something. There was a connection somehow. Anyway, somehow I got the African cotton. I had probably 4 or 5 skeins, let's call them, but they're not skeins, combs, whatever, that were like, that's just the end of one of them. So I made a war, didn't do any sampling, didn't need to, made a war of that single over-twisted cotton, put it on this board macumber. I never owned a loom until 1975. So most of my weaving, even now, was done on other people's looms. I think if you laid it all out, if you ever could, nobody could, but if you ever could, I think the pile would be like this of the stuff that was done on other people's looms and other people's looms. Anyway, these are the 2 shirts I made. And it was such a horrible work to put on, such a horrible work to weave off. I mean, I loved it, every second of it. I loved the way it was coming out, the way it looked, the feel. But it was an encumber. And I had been weaving this, very forgiving, mixed 8 to the inch stuff. So I would like step on the release, and the back beam would release, of course, and every single thread would ply with its next door neighbor. And it took me, I can't tell you how far I had to weave before I realized, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't step on the back beam release, Maybe I should just ease off on that tension or let someone else advance it while I release it or something. But I learned a lot, and I did weave it off. And I made that shirt for me, which I actually can fit in. I was surprised to find yesterday. It feels a little tight up in the chest, and it's a little bulky, but, and I wove this one for a friend, gave it away to this guy that I was in love with, who gave it to his girlfriend a year or 2 later. And she threw it in the washer and dryer, but he gave it back. He got it back from her when I said, you gave it to her. Because I was still friendly with her, with him, I mean, and still am, actually. He got it back from her. And then it had all kinds of stains on it from being in the washer and the dryer and whatever else she's done with it. So, and now it's faded from me wearing it all these years, too. But I overdyed it in a black walnut bath at some point because I was hoping the cotton would pick up a little bit of it. It did, so that it kind of modified the stain. Anyway, this one over to. So, I wore this a lot when my kids were little. I'm really glad I got this back and that I still own it. And I said to my son when I was trying to decide whether I'd wear it for the talk or not, I thought it would be too bulky, so I wouldn't keep it on. And I'm not keeping it on. She's got it in crackle. It's from Davidson's book. It's called Mirrored Minarets, I think. She calls it crackle. It's not a crackle weave, I believe. I'm almost sure Tony and I talked about this once in the last year or 2. I'm almost sure it's actually really an overshot. It might have a little, like, one-off step in it, but it's not a true crackle. in, and they said, and I thought, well, that's exactly where I want to go. Whatever third choice or fourth choice or whatever I had put in was not at all what I wanted. I read about that in my journal lately, but I won't bore you with details. But anyway, I ended up going to the Peter Collingwood workshop, and I had in my mind that it really didn't cause much, again, one of those memory things, that it really didn't cause much trouble. You know, that someone was sick in the morning or something, and so it was not a problem. No. The poor, I call them red tape ladies, and I work in a library now, so I'm a red tape lady myself. Had a horrible time with this upstart person who just showed up and started weaving and, like, picked up on spraying, you know, quickly. It was really fun. And, of course, partly because I was afraid I was going to get kicked out every second, so I better get what I could. I made up this work last week, so I have something to show you guys about what spraying looks like when it works. Some of you maybe tried it. I know I taught a little mini here. When you work spraying, you work with your hand. Even on a huge piece like that one in the corner, you can hardly see, but we'll bring it out. It's too heavy to just hang anywhere. And you're basically bringing up like one thread from the back, dropping one from the front, one from the back, dropping one from the front. It's very slow, for one thing, and painstaking, and enjoyable. I like it. I still do it sometimes. There are loads. Oh, that's in here. I wove this backpack. This is coming around soon. I'll tell you more in a minute. I did loads of samples at that workshop. It was one of those like end of convergence 3 or 4 day kind of things. And he's a wonderful teacher. He's an amazing thinker as far as being able to do sort of a reverse engineer, I call it. My son gave me that word. Thank you, Jason. Someone who can look at structures, textiles, and figure out how they were done, and not just figure out and make them himself, but also figure out how to diagram them and teach them so other people can make them too. So these are the spraying samples, almost all from that workshop, probably 2/3 from that workshop, and then some other small pieces I did after. And this is sort of a typical spraying possibility, which I stretched. Otherwise, it would just look as like as those would. That's when you take it off the frame. That's what it does. That's what spraying does. It just curls up in a ball, sort of. It's got all this internal twist from what you're doing. You're crossing threads, a lot like twining. The thing that's different about spraying and twining is you're working on this stretched warp, so that you make a twist on, say, the top half, and then when you finish that row, which I'm going to finish, you push the twist down, and you're making 2 halves of the fabric from the 2 ends of the warp toward the center. So you're sort of weaving twice for every twist. It was really good in terms of efficiency. It was a really good step up from twining. And it was a very common fabric in some parts of the world. In Europe, during the Middle Ages, some of these middle-aged, medieval restoration people that get together, unlike the Civil War people, for fairs and stuff, they pride themselves on being sprangers and tablet weavers. I've noticed on websites lately. Another one of my loves that I started in North Carolina too is dyeing, which this is also an example of. And this board, of course, is an example of. And these are from the workshops that I used to teach of dye, natural dye. But these are vegetable dyes here. Well, actually, there may be animal dye in here too. Some of these red, I'm almost sure must be cochineal, which is that bug from Central America that lives on cactus and gets swept up in soft brushes and then dried, and the bodies of the insects turn into this wonderful ray of reds and purples that are like this back here. We did a little dye workshop at my house last June, and these are the colors we came up with in the area group that we had. And we also did a little bit with black walnut. That's what these little guys are. But the big skeins were the leftover pots of cochineal. When you add lichen, no, that's right, this is the militaria. I'm thinking of the wrong thing. Some of these are cochineal, and some of them aren't militaria. This is the militaria. Thank you, Mary. Umbilical umbilicaria is a lichen. Let's start that again. That grows up in the mountains in North Carolina. It's fairly common. I've never seen it growing in Connecticut. It certainly may. It probably does. I mean, if they've got rattlesnakes in Connecticut, they probably have umbilicaria. It's a lichen that looks a little bit like the other lichens that grow flat on rocks that you'd have to like sit there with a nail file and pick to get loose. But umbilicaria is attached to just one spot, which is why it has that name. It's got a little umbrella holder. And so it's very easy to collect. And it's been a wonderful dye plant for a long time. This is, the redder is what happens when you add vinegar. Well, first you ferment it with ammonia, I'm sorry. You take this dried lichen, you break it up, put it in a jar with ammonia and water for a few months. And it starts to run within a few days. The reason it's in a few months is because you can sort of loosen the lid in a room that you don't live in. And the ammonia, evaporates, and then you end up with this powdery stuff. So you put the powdery stuff in water, you boil it, and you get these absolutely amazing colors. And if you choose to, you can add, the lighter ones are the exhaust baths as the color was going away. But if you add some baking soda, you get bluer purples, and if you add some vinegar, you get redder purples. You get a nice range, and this is sort of the typical standard. But there is also cochineal. And some of you said that here. And cochineal is an insect that grows. Sorry about that. I'm almost done with this rest. You can see the big event of pushing the twist one way. So I did this spraying, and typically spraying would not have a weft. You probably see these weft butterflies hanging, dangling here. Typically spraying, as far as I know, around the world, never had a weft. I'm not saying that I invented it. I think, I don't think anybody invented anything. And some of you knitters, you read Elizabeth Zimmerman's books, she has that phrase, unventing things, meaning you figured it out yourself, but you're pretty sure probably someone else has already done it too. Anyway, so I invented this business of putting a weft yarn into this cord here is called the safety cord. If I should realize I thought I made a mistake or, the baby spilled something or got hurt or something, I could just drop it. That safety cord would take me back to the lab shed I had. But I'm pulling it out now because I'm going to put it in a new shed that I'm sure of. And I'm going to push the twist down, as I said. And I'm actually going to put a weft in because one day when I was making spraying, I said to myself, I wonder what happens if you put weft in. And I tried it, and I was just amazed to find what happened. That it was a wonderful result. This is what I'm doing. You've seen them now. They're going around. Some of you have seen them anyway. And you can see how jumbly they're looking. I had a dream once of a dragon and a giant purple and pink dragon. It's probably sort of a 70s dream. And I had this idea of weaving somehow some images from this dream. And when I met Frank, I thought this is how you could do it. It was like somehow in the dream the dragon sort of shed its skin, and the skin just kind of like crumpled into this tangly mass. And then the dragon with some kind of a good force that helped in some way, but not being overly judgmental or something. But what happens, and you've seen them, because I've had them show before, what happens is instead of it just going blah, 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 when it's got the weft thread in it, it makes this nice, graceful twist. The twist is still there, but it smooths it out. So, Andrew, Brendan, want to come up? Please? You're about to say right. This is Andrew. This is Emmett. That's Brendan. Let's stand up in front of the table so people can see better. Our library in the town where we were living at the time, not the one where we bought the house, was adding on this huge addition which made this small library into like a good-sized library. The addition was four times maybe as big as the first edition, which they had. And I decided I would do a hanging, and I couldn't decide whether to sort of weave, like an overshotty thing or a blankety thing. But I wanted to do the spring, and I went to News, it so happened, when Seamus, who's not here, was big enough to be left at night, but I only went for one night because we weren't sure how he would do. And I was talking with someone there, and I said, well, so I'm trying to think about what to do for this hanging that I'm going to donate, And I described, like, I might do kind of a blankety kind of thing, and I said, but there's this spring thing and she said, well, it sounds to me like you already know what you want to do, which was a really good thing for her to say. So then I had to work out how to do this. The reason these guys are holding this out, you guys must be getting tired. I made this warp and stretched it through the living room. I put a 2x4 on the window frame at one end of the room. And halfway down the room, or 3/4 of the way down the room, there was sort of a room divider. So that was another place where I could, without, like, it wasn't our house, we were caretakers of the house. Caretakers of the park. It was kind of a junky old house, but very comfortable, and we enjoyed living there. So in other words, I could put a few nails in without worrying about it. In other words. But I wasn't really going to take any walls down or anything. So I could stretch this warp from, one end to the other when I was working on it. And because it was spring, and because it is forgiving, and I knew what I was doing, sort of, and I had safety cords in, and I had wefts in, I could take it down, and I wasn't working on it, and sort of like just bring one end up and hang it on the other side. So it didn't take up the whole room, which is good, because we all lived it together. But I had no idea whether it would really still spiral, because it weighs like 20 pounds, and I just was so afraid that it would be, okay, now you can hang it up the way, now you can show what happens when you take it off. Oh, yes. I weave in letters when I can, but I also embroider it. It's a piece I'm giving away. So I think one of my friends was there the day that I finally got to the last. Oh, and sprang, by the way, I didn't say this, gets horrible in the middle. I mean, it's easy to make that shed when you're out at the ends, or it's somewhere in about the middle. I mean, somewhere in about the 1/3, 1/3 and 2/3 section. But when you're close to the middle, that's the way to say it. But you do have to keep doing the best you can and get, if you're going to have it a one solid piece, you can make two matching pieces, fringes or something if you want. But if you're making one solid piece, I imagine they did, by the way, because mittens and stuff used to be made with sprang. I imagine they did make the two halves and not bother trying to meet it in the center, and then sew up the sides or something. I'm not sure how. I've never had one of those. Anyway, it finally came off the loom. My friend Annie was there that day, thank God. And I said, I don't know when it's going to work. I don't know when it's going to work. But it did. It still worked, even though it was so heavy. And it's got, I think this form has a lot of possibilities. I mean, I like this. This is actually my favorite side. To me, it looks like a marriage is one thing that always comes to mind. Because, you've got one person pulling one way and the other person pulling the other way, and somehow it works, even though sometimes it seems like it never could. Anyway, this is the big spring piece that I did for the library, and there's an article, a newspaper article here about it. Somewhere. How like it, huh? Just like that? Yeah, I put this is another little backpacker thing. It's got this little carabiner on it. Anybody know what a carabiner is? They're probably using something else now. But it's a rock climbing tool. And it just hangs out a nail. We put the nail up. Actually, we've been, someone in our family has been the maintenance person at that library for a long time. My husband and my son are still doing it now. You're not even doing it together, too. So I think we just put in a nail. And I could say something about having pieces judged right this second. I'll make it short. I put that thing in our show once. I'm glad I did. And has anyone here ever gotten a lousy comment? When you open your envelope and you go like, what? Should not have used this blue, the person said. And anybody can have an opinion on which colors go together. I knew that I had overdyed that blue to get those purples. I knew they were related. But I should not have used this. She didn't know which room it was going into, what the building looked like. She or he didn't. Anyway, enough about judging. ones bring, it feels fun and easy instead of like, oh my God, I have no idea how to do this. Which, mind you, most of those pieces, if I was trying to do some of those ones that are on that, I would be with the book, trying, pulling out again. The same summer I hitchhiked to California. On the way back, I stayed in Madison for a while and borrowed a room and worked in a bakery and lived with some nice people temporarily, paid my share of the rent temporarily, and did this masterpiece, for me at least, of double weave. It's a tubular backpack with a one-layer flap so that I could have a zippered front flap. I wouldn't have left the fringes if I was making it now, but I did nice leather work on it. So I used to work in a leather factory. I was a stitcher at a leather garment factory for a long time, so I had some nice pieces of leather left over. The straps are tubular, double weave, padded on the loom, with adjustable. These two come right out of the weaving, and one of them goes up and becomes the buckle part, and the other one becomes. So some of you might appreciate this. I'm sure that the person. This is another one that came back to me. Thank God. I sold this to someone at a little craft show when Andrew was a baby, and Jim and I were like, we've got to do something with our crafts to try to make money, which didn't turn out to be a business, but we still actually have a business name, but do a lot with it. I sold it to someone, and I had $75 written on it, and she thought it said $25, and she was a personal friend, and she handed me $25, and I took it, and felt horrible afterwards, but I really didn't want to, I just didn't want to know how to say it different or whatever, do it different. However, about, he's 20, so about 5 years ago now, 4 maybe, I ran into her. She still lives in the same area, but we don't see each other now because we have different interests in the kids all growing up and all that. And I said, do you still have that backpack? She said, yeah, I've really hardly ever used it. And I said, I would buy that back from you. Now it really was in my favor that I'd only taken it. I did get it back. I think there's only one other little scrap of this I want to say something about. That same hitchhiking trip, I went back through Buffalo, which is where I lived when I came home from Cuba. I went to Cuba on a work brigade and only stayed there for a couple months, but it was a significant time in my life. And this little piece of textile, which I have no idea where it came from, was given to me by one of the women that I had known in Cuba on that brigade and when we got back into Buffalo. And I was leaving and she said, oh, let me give you a little something. I hung this on my wall, and it was my earring holder for a long time. So I just want to say that earring holders are one of the best things to do with small pieces of wisdom. And I've done it with lots of things. Card weaving is something I learned in North Carolina, and spinning is something I learned in North Carolina. I brought some spinning here, and I also brought a sample of my hair, which I regularly save my combings. And there's a little piece tucked in. You probably heard me say when I wove that brown jacket here that there was one warp strand that was mine, my own hair. It was from when my hair was brown. And I came across it when I was making this work, and I thought, oh, that would be cool. I can always see it if I just hold it to the light because it's so much hair. Yeah, it's this strand right here. It doesn't matter. It's like the typical central brown strand of this jacket, color of this jacket. But I only did one piece of it. Thank goodness it was a horrible work. Anyway, I do still take my hair though and spin it and use it once in a while for some stuff. But I did learn card weaving, and I've done just a couple little pieces of card weaving. Well, more than a couple. I've done some bag straps too. When these ankle bands, when what had been ankle bands on this hand-woven linen bag wore out, I wove them again with soft rug-type cotton. It's kind of like a mop cotton, actually, but in card weaving, so they're going to hold up this way. I wove this when I was Anne's apprentice. This is one of the first things I wove. Here's the card weaving. They can go around. This is one I designed and gave my mom, and she hangs on her mantle at Christmas. So it's part of our family life, too. Over here. I haven't been doing that, but I should. But then people don't know which way they're going, too. I know that. Sorry about that. Okay, so this was another traveling time. In 1975, I lived in, 76. Okay, so this one's good. I lived in Vermont after I our team, but another person using the same old bobbin mill, which was also a furniture shop at the time, made the first pattern for the first Vermont casting stove. Duncan Syme was there in my shop, our shop, making that pattern at that time. And one of the guys I worked for in this small partnership, this furniture group, which is still going, although I'm not particularly acquainted with them, but I see their ads and stuff. I finished this blanket. It was a 47th anniversary present for Albert and Thelma, because that's when I was living there, and I already knew myself well enough to know I might not be there forever, and we better celebrate this one instead of waiting for 50 or something like that. They didn't have children. So I decided I'd leave them a blanket, which they never used, by the way, but I'll get to that. I wove this blanket, took it off the loom, washed it, didn't wash it enough. It's not as full as it should be, I'm thinking now. And took it and showed it to this guy named Skosh, who'd been born in Japan, so he had this Japanese nickname, but he was, an American kid. Didn't speak any Japanese, I don't know. And he said, which I don't think was exactly a commentary on my furnishing skills, but he did say, you can weave things like this, and you're working in our shop? But my furniture skills were nothing. Anyway, Albert and Thelma, yeah, they're okay. They're just like Albert and Thelma loved their electric blanket and never used that blanket, partly because I left those stupid fridges on there, by the way. But, no, it's just, I made it for Albert and Thelma in 1975. And then one time when I had 4 kids or 5 or something, and I was up visiting Albert and Thelma said, I want to ask you something. Very polite, such good people. She's still alive, as far as I know, and he's dead. She said, I want to ask you something. Now that you've got a family, could you use that blanket? I wouldn't want to hurt your feelings, but we don't really need it. It was so nice. And I love that talking yarn. I mean, one of the things I did was I really learned about beautiful yarn. So I saved enough to make myself this little poncho. And the first time I wore it, it really wasn't very warm. So then I knitted on this cowl, which has a big muffle in it, which needs to be repaired. So it's this side. And speaking of repairs, one of the things I've also done for weaving over the years is reweaving. I actually had a job. One time I entered an ad in the paper for a weaver here in Connecticut, and it was run, here's where I wrote it down, it was run by Pasha's in West Hartford. And what they were really doing, it turned out, was running this ad so that they could prove to the immigration officials that they couldn't find anyone to do this job. In Connecticut, they had to bring in some more cousins or nephews or friends of friends or whoever. But the young son, the young partner that took my call said, oh yeah, come on in, and hired me that day. And then he talked to his lawyer and his brother, whoever, uncle, whoever, and found out that he wasn't supposed to have hired me because they really had somebody on the line that they wanted to bring in. But I did work there for a while. But it was when I had just met Jim and I was going to have my first baby and I didn't keep driving to New Coventry and West Hartford very long. But it was a good place to work, and what I really did was just a little bit of reweaving. Mostly what I was manually putting on. It worked. I have a house full, of course, now. I don't know where some things are. I didn't have a lot of materials around, but I wanted to weave. And there was a furniture shop that made looms and stuff, spinning wheels, so I had a chance to use a loom. So I went to the Salvation Army and bought, there were a lot of them there at the time, because the Navy is such a big part of Seattle. A white, off-white, cream, natural blanket and cut it up in strips and then dyed it with local things. So while we were splitting shakes and putting out and cooking our food over an open fire, I also would be doing a little dyeing over an open fire. And I wove this blanket and I've woven it twice, this rug. And I've woven it twice, by the way, speaking of reweaving, because after a while, the warp and weft knots that I made really weren't as strong and capable as they should have been, and I didn't braid the ends and so on. So I thought, well, I can just weave again. So I did. A whole bunch. Right. Yeah, it does often live in our bathroom. The bathroom, which has been taken apart for a long time. see that I bought my first loom just before I went to Pasha's, and I was teaching dye workshops during those times. Well, we touched on those. Probably, yeah, probably just need to pull some out. Oh, yeah, this is from a long time ago, too. I started this needlepoint in 1975. It's beautiful. Oh, yeah, pattern. A friend of mine had gotten at a salvage yard a beautiful storm drain sewer grate for probably for a garden walk or, a brick garden path or something like that. I mean, who knows what it was for. It could have been a heat grate in a mansion. I'm not sure what it was. But it was a beautiful piece of cast iron, the shape of the black line. And I had done a rubbing, and then I, decided what color. And I've often thought that if I ever felt like I had 4 lifetimes to do needlepoint, that I would also do it, I think, again, if I ever did it again, I would do it like seasonally, so that there would be, some movement around the circle of these different seasonal colors of greens and these seasonal colors of red. This is a treasure of mine that my mom gave me recently. I didn't make it. It's something that my grandmother made that also needed reweaving. We knit it in this way, and I did some repair work on it. Aren't these colors amazing? She was just using odds and ends, and I know that at various times in my life I would have looked at it and thought like, oh boy, about the colors, but I just love how it's just hit or miss, and it's, I think, kind of wonderful. I was pregnant with my first kid, and I had no idea what it would be like to be a mom. I liked being pregnant, but I wanted to. And I was going to leave a baby one day. Poor Jason. But I'd taken care of my nephew a little bit just before I got pregnant. But I didn't know a lot about babies. That's for sure. But they taught me. But I got this on the loom and started weaving it and thought, oh, these floats are too big for a baby blanket. So instead I made it into a wedding blanket for my husband and I. My husband was his, and I had to take it off the bed to bring it here. And Gypsy, one of my favorite coverlets that I had seen her weave was this white on white, white wool on white cotton. It's wonderful, I think. And no fringe. And no fringe. Gypsy would have never stood for this transition. And Jason, that was on the loom for a long time, took forever to weave it. Now I was really finding out how hard it was to weave when I had children. So Jason got crocheted. Collins isn't here. Andrews is. We looked again today, couldn't find it. That's Seamus' worst friend. Here's Emmett. Brendan's was the first one I wove without a seam on the center. This was the first time I did, that kind of open it up and have it double wide. And this is vegetable dye. It was a little brighter and prettier when it was done, but I liked it faded too. This is Brendan's blanket. We should still use them like that. And this is Seamus, which is not here. This one's been rewoven a few times. Boy, talk about your cheesy weaving. But, I love it too because now it's a member of the family. So, it's cheesy, but this is the part that's currently being rewoven here. And I haven't finished it. But I've rewoven others. If you hold it up to the light, you can see another major section where, rewoven. Reweaving is not hard to do.
Made out of the same.
Oh, you do? Yeah.
You can tell it's well worn, it's well loved.
And this one is Emmett, baby blanket, which was in a show. This is another one that I kind of got some lousy comments on. And I was kind of sorry I brought it. It was like the first piece I'd finished in like 2 or 3 years, and I brought it, and it kind of ended up over in the corner, piled up with some other stuff that also kind of looked to me like it was sort of being left in the corner, piled up. But everything can't be in the middle of the room, I realized. But the comments were kind of, I thought, unnecessarily harsh. But this is Emmett blanket, and he loves it, and I love it. And this is a blanket that we wove for There's so much here. This is a scarf from that same era. Oh, this is typical of the kind of weaving I did with Linda. It's a stole. It was a stole, and we wove one of them to give to my great aunt who was turning 100 in Norway. But we wove the other one to keep. Jane and I were going to take turns with it, and then I cut it up and made it into a baby blanket. So Emmett actually had like a baby blanket, and then a toddler blanket too. And that's some hand spun, Angora with some rabbits along here too. And the other big blanket, big-ish, was when we wove for Judy's wedding. They had a brown living room at the time. It has not proved to be her true color for decorating, but Jane and I wove it together for Judy for a wedding, for her first home. Yes. And when my sister Jane was learning to weave, this was her first piece. She dyed the yarn.
We dyed it together.
This was her first piece that she ever wove. Amazing, huh? What else did you bring, Jane?
The poncho behind, and that scarf, the gray scarf.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's
And the poncho scarf.
Oh, actually, yeah, this is another piece of dyeing stuff. These are some bright colors that I dyed in O'Hare. Back in the 70s, down in North Carolina, probably in Minnie for Jane. And Jane, yeah, beautiful stuff. I did a little doll making. One of these dolls is a birthing doll because our boys were born at home. So the older boys were going to be around when the baby was born unless something came up. So this doll actually has a baby. And she's supposed to have a placenta, but the placenta is somewhere within this blanket. She did have a placenta for a long time. What else? Here's another rug that I wove for Susie's wedding. My another sister is not here. I have 4 sisters. Very lucky. This is again vegetable dyes and war paste with just a multi-group of natural white, making the bulges on the side. That. Oh, these are some things Steve and I wore when they were little. I was more fun so they could learn a little bit about weaving. And this was one that I particularly liked because I think I thought we were going to make bookmarks and give everybody presents for Christmas, but we never got it done. And I'm so glad we didn't, because if I'd cut it up, I know that would have cut apart the parts where the weaving is just completely, theoretically, dysfunctional. But not, of course, for a little band. I now sometimes use this when I'm doing some card weaving or some other type of weaving when I'm doing some abstract. That kind of a piece. And one time when the kids were small and I was teaching people how to weave, I did this little a bunch of bathroom rugs. The one that's hourglass shaped is t-shirt fabric. That's why because I wasn't pulling it. And these are another vegetable dye rug that I kept. Unfortunately, I used lousy work yarn and didn't finish it as well as I could have. But I used yarn that was really important to me. And we still use it in our room, getting mossy too. And when I wove it, I'd say to myself, didn't mark what the name of the dye plant. But I did save samples of the yarn. mass one time at the church that I went to. So there were some people who'd given up their babies for adoption, some people who had abortions, a lot of different stillbirths and miscarriages, and there were a group of us that got together, like I said, a group mass, and that was the altar cloth. And I still hang it up in the house. A little too bad about the stain, but it's love. And then I had no idea, of course, but then I was having another pregnancy, and I lost that baby too. That was an analogy. So I was in the middle of a coverlet, a baby coverlet, that I was weaving for a therapist in trade for some therapy sessions, and grief counseling and stuff. And one of my dramas, and I think probably for most of you could happen too, one of my dramas is doing, I can't really go out and buy more right now. I hope I've got enough. I wove the first panel of the job one. Then I wove this, because I needed to leave something for the baby that had just died. Then I wove the second panel. And when I finished the second panel, and it was the right size, guys, I had a ball this big of the main background cabin blue. Sometimes there's enough, but sometimes there isn't, of course. And then it turned out that Emmett was born. Ta-da! And after Emmett, I did get pregnant one more time. And that baby didn't make it either. That one was Gabriel. So this is a little piece of weaving I did for Gabriel. It reminded me of a piece of weaving my mom had when I was a little kid, which I've sort of seen a piece of once in a while, like I should pick one up if I ever see him again at a tag sale. But it was something that was around, I think, pretty commonly in the 40s or 50s, sort of little table mat things that weren't woven in 2 months ago, but it was sort of gave the same impression. Some sort of supplemental work, I think. I wove this little piece, and my dad was in his hospital room, it turned out, for his second to the last day, when I had taken his hospital room, and it wasn't tied, it was hemp stitched, but it wasn't trimmed or washed or anything. I brought it in and showed it to him, so it was the last piece of weaving that he had in his hands before he died. And we used it on the little table, and we had some pictures when at his wake, just a week later. Thank goodness I'd already done the hemp stitch. And so then I used an idea that I had. It took me a while to get around to it. All these grief projects took me a while to get around to them. Believe me, that class action math wasn't right away. It was like a year later. But anyway, after a while, I used something that I'd heard a long time before when I went to a little workshop, a design workshop with Paula Berenson. Has he been anything to anybody? He's a potter, wrote some nice books. And he had talked about when his father died, he made a set of beautiful hand-built colored clay potter, beautiful work. He made a set of wine glasses so that each of his brothers and sisters and his mom and he could each drink a glass of wine. Even though they lived in different parts of the country, they could drink a glass of wine on the anniversary. So whenever they thought it was dead man. But definitely so that they could, have it on his anniversary of his birthday, another family holiday. So that's what I did. I put on a replica warp, and I didn't use the African cotton, so it doesn't curl in the corners. But I put on a replica warp and wove these little pieces, one for each of my sisters and my mom. And the other little green one is a stole for a priest that was going away. He's been very helpful to us, and I liked it a lot. And it made a beautiful stole. But I got to keep a little sample, and it's a wonderful earring. And every single time I've done a grief thing, it helps. I think it helps with the searching part. If you use Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's ideas about grief, there's like the anger phase and there's the speaking phase. I think it helps to be doing creative design decisions that can sort of help with thinking, what color makes you, what color is suggested by this person or whatever. But absolutely, for sure, she had, and she showed me last week when we were together. And I'd been thinking about it, and I already bought Peter Collingwood's book, but I hadn't. Oh, this should go around too. Ply split braiding. It's that newest technique book of Peter Collingwood. You like split the ply and shove the weft through it. So it's like twisted fabric. Sort of like a twine fabric, but you're taking apart the ply and twisting it through. Just a piece of Peter Collingwood's tablet weaving that I bought for myself lately. Oh, and this is a fantastic thing also from Peter. After I saw Jason, I emailed Peter, and he's been, corresponding again. I knew him from Sprang, but I hadn't kept in touch. But this is a piece of steel yarn that he just sent me the cord so I could see what it's like when he was sending me the tablet weaving, I think. The tablet weaving says, "And there shall be warping and gnashing of teeth." Sort of a weaving joke, of course. And the only other thing over here is a little sewing project from Area 6, and some of the Tackaday stuff, and a little beading project. And this is a sample from the Jason workshop. And I think I showed you everything. Huh? Except my article. Want to take these around? More than enough, I'm sure. This is an article I wrote a few years ago about weaving 5 minutes a day. It's sort of a take it home and read it later kind of thing. And I wanted to do a couple things with the handout that we started with, too. I was wondering if people wanted to do a little show of hands on a couple of these questions, like, when did you begin weaving? Or maybe let's start with where. Who learned to weave here in Connecticut? Oh, a number of us. Thanks to us here at the Still, Connecticut. How about the rest of New England? I could put my hand up for Worcester because I actually started with Worcester next. Oh, not New England. Shall we say the Eastern Seaboard? You learned to weave here in the States? I thought you learned to weave back home. No? Where'd you learn to weave?
At home in Rhode Island.
In Rhode Island. Okay, that's another New England state. Okay, fine. And definitely on the seaboard. Who else? Midwest? South? Start telling me where you wove besides Connecticut. Anybody? Montana? I know at least one member of our guild who learned to weave in a weaving mill in Putnam, Connecticut, as a teenager. That was his first experience with weaving. He wove for 10 years as a teenager and young adult. That was just his job. Then he went to RISD, got the last class of textile engineering degrees, and ran big weaving shops for the rest of his career, and some spinning shops and stuff too, because of course things were changing so much in here, and moved a few times, I'm sure. I know another weaver I was talking with the other day who told me that she learned to weave in a refugee camp in southern Germany at the end of World War II. She was a Lithuanian refugee, and another Lithuanian refugee was there with her, a girl her own age, and another one, she said, she was talking about the other day, we had such a nice conversation. She said, we thought she was so grown up. She was probably 17 or 18, and but she knew how to weave, and she taught us. And she said, she was so pretty, and I could sort of feel like the woman was sitting there with her. Anyway, this gave me a thought about the way I want to end this with this talk. She learned to weave. She said we had no materials. I still have some of those little pieces, almost nothing. We had sewing thread and pieces of cardboard. So we wound the work on cardboard and used needles and sewing thread, and that's how I learned to weave. Started. She's still learning the way the rest of us are. Anybody else want to say anywhere else that they know they? Another member of our guild I know learned to weave in Sweden. She told me about this when we were sitting and talking and weaving one time. She was an exchange
Bonnie answer. Who helped you learn to weave? 3 books
Yeah.
from the library.
Yeah. Which one?
Mary Black. New Key to Weaving.
Yeah, that's Mary Black.
New Key to Weaving. And
Davison.
Davison. And there was another one on a drawing, a British book, and I forgot her name, but I just ordered it used,
Yeah.
and it's an old book.
And let's do a little bit about when too, and then we'll close. Who learned to weave since the year 2000, in this new millennium? Yeah. How about in the 90s? A number of us. 80s? 70s? 60s? Any 50s here? There are some, but they may not be here in the room right now. So this is what I want to do. I want to just spend a little time, we'll just close with a moment of silence. I want us to think about the people that helped us weave. And I also hope that you will, if you feel like it, of course, it's totally voluntary, think about why weaving is important to you. And think about what you especially enjoy weaving. And try to, if you've gotten a little off key, pull a little closer to where you want to be. Or if you're sick of weaving, for heaven's sake, go work in your garden or do something else that makes you joy. But let's have a moment of silence and gratitude for the people that have helped us. So let's picture, I'm picturing, for example, Gypsy and the people I was apprenticed with and partners with, and the people who learned with me, students, because they often taught me lots of little things, because they picked up something before I did, and books, writers, Peter Collingwood. And then if you want to sort of just picture them, sort of in your mind's eye, sort of bring them in, standing with us here, sitting with us. Oh, and by the way, I know some of you are not weavers. I happen to know for sure. So just picture whoever else does something that you really care about. If it's baking, that's fine. If it's Tai Chi or writing, whatever, gardening, whatever is your area of creative bliss. And then let's try to picture the shadowy figures, that most of whom we probably don't know, that taught the people that taught us. And if we can, we could picture it sort of traveling out into the world, and picturing weavers all around the globe who are just weaving. Some of them have it as a job, or they're just making something for their family, or they're spinners, or they're dyers, and they just live with their own thing. And we should think back to our ancestors, because almost all of us have textile ancestors. We may not know them by name. Few of us may know at least some who did a lot of sewing or knitting or whatever. But most of us don't know weavers. But we have them because weaving's been around for a long time. Weaving was before clay, by the way. Before pottery. They sort of pushed the clay into baskets and burned away the basket and then the clay in the fire, and then the clay stayed as a pot. So at first they thought they needed to form the clay into sort of woven shapes. Anyway, so let's think of our ancestors who mended fishing nets, or spun, or wove tapestries in the Middle Ages, or worked in the mills, or knitted for their families. And then we need to think of the people that are coming in. This host of weavers. I like to think that sometimes one of us may have already woven something that in 2,000 years, some archaeologist, probably Tony, some archaeologist will pounce upon and say, look at this. This proves that they knew this structure in Connecticut, in the area they called Connecticut. So think about, just by doing something, giving it away, selling it, using it, passing it on in our family, certainly by teaching or taking classes where we always end up doing a little teaching too, certainly passing on to younger members of our family, that we're part of a huge journey.
job, Mom.
Huh?
Yeah, it was good, Mom.
Good job.
Excellent.